I've got one announcement for you. You'll be pleased to hear that Professor Jeffrey Sachs is going to join us at 3:15 this afternoon. So part of the session this afternoon at 3:15. Okay, we are now going to play the video showing the work of the Council for Business Sustainability. This is the, I'm getting an interesting message from the back of the room, which is curious. I have no idea what that means. Are we going to be able to show the video? I think we're showing the video on the Council for Business Sustainability. Thank you.
Is a very strong instrument.
Play a leading role in shaping policy.
Bring together the top players in the industry.
Highlight the things that we need to do.
TERI's focus is on using its research to develop more sustainable development options, on creating policies, on creating products, on creating services.
As far as TERI is concerned, it's an organization we are very familiar with from Tata Chemicals. Its initial founding support was very deeply connected with the Tata Group and Tata Chemicals, with our previous past chairman, managing director Dalbari Seth being very, very deeply involved with this institution.
TERI's work with the Energy Transitions Commission, which I think can become very, very important, which is basically how do we get dispatchable renewable power at an affordable level.
One of the important technologies we have worked deeply with TERI has been the mycorrhiza technology of how to remove and how to make saline infested land workable for agriculture. I think these sort of technologies are very, very critical, and TERI plays an important role in reshaping and bringing those technologies in.
TERI has great name globally, and TERI CBS is also now performing the role of how to work on climate friendly activities, how to bring together the top players in the industry.
Apart from promoting policies, products and services, it is also important that we reach out with these products, policies and services to people who can use them. The TERI Council on Business Sustainability is a very strong instrument through which, one, we reach out to industry, but two, through which we also hear from industry about its challenges.
I think we will all feel we have succeeded if we can get India to announce that we will no more add coal-fired power plants. In order to go down that journey, I suspect and I expect TERI CBS to take a leading role as an intervention point between government and industry and academia to highlight the things that we need to do.
And I think the CBS, which is the business coming together as a voluntary community, can play a leading role in shaping policy, in putting actions, and also working together in finding solutions to take the forward steps in terms of sustainability.
TERI CBS can play a major role by involving all related players, as well as to share the best practices, best innovations in the sector. Definitely TERI CBS would be involving all players, all the sector industry people, and would try to act as a leader to bring up the climate change friendly policies.
We believe that this instrument has helped many organizations in moving towards a path on sustainability, and we remain committed to providing the kinds of tools, the kinds of methodologies and examples that the industry needs to move towards more sustainable paths.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely vital stuff, providing business with the technological intelligence and information it needs to seize the opportunities of a low-carbon economy. Now we're going to move on to a fascinating plenary on India's renewable revolution towards a cleaner, cheaper electricity system. So I'd like to invite onto the stage our panel today. We have Mr. Anand Kumar, Secretary from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in India. We have Mr. Vineet Mittal, who's Chairman of the Avaada Group. Mr. David Nelson, who's Executive Director of Energy Finance for the Climate Policy Initiative. And Lord Adair Turner, who's chair of the Energy Transitions Commission based in London, and our chair, who's Mr Ajay Shankar, Distinguished Fellow from TERI. And we're going to kick off with a message from, I think, one of the most powerful advocates of sustainable energy for everyone. She's Ms Rachel Kyte. She's CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, and she's Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. So let's hear from Ms Kyte first, if we please. We have the video of Rachel Kyte.
Hello again. It's really a great honour for me to be able to speak to you all gathered at the World Sustainable Development Summit in 2019. I am very sorry that I can't be there with you. My name is Rachel Kyte. I'm the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. 2019 is an important year in the building of momentum towards the delivery against the Sustainable Development Goals, and in light of the IPCC report in October of 2018, figuring out how we do that with an explosive increase in the scale and speed with which we can achieve the decarbonisation of our global economies. Now, in India, there have been tremendous progress made on many fronts in recent years. We can celebrate the extraordinary progress in electrification. We can celebrate the rebalancing of energy supply away from coal into renewables. We can get excited about how India is thinking through the stabilisation of the grid that's necessary for all of that. We can be excited about the domestic and foreign investment into a clean energy system. We can be really excited that India is one of the few countries that's really getting its arms around and its head around the cooling challenge. As cities become the way in which we live in a warmer planet, we will need cooling solutions so that we are safe, so that we can work productively, so our food is safe and our medicines and vaccines are safe. So it's right that you should sit in Delhi and talk about sustainable development and talk about how to speed and scale solutions. So in September of this year, the Secretary General has asked heads of state to come to the General Assembly, has asked business leaders and others to come, and what he wants to do is to get us to focus on those areas where, working together, we can make exponential progress, where we can speed up and get breakthroughs in the way in which we are moving towards the decarbonisation of our economies and to a safer planet. So I hope that at this summit you will be able to focus on those areas where, if we think differently, if we work together differently, if we marshal finance and we deploy the technology, so much of which is already available to us in different ways, we can achieve progress faster and we can achieve progress for more people. The last thing I want to say is that I work for Sustainable Energy for All, so do you. That for all is really important. If a decarbonised economy doesn't work for everyone, it will not happen. So exploiting decentralisation, exploiting digitalisation and all of these other trends available to us so that we can make a decarbonised economy be fairer for all, that is our ultimate challenge. I urge you to think big and to act fast. Thank you very much.
Excellent. That sets the tone very well for the discussion, and I'd like to invite Mr Shankar to kick things off. Thank you.
Our session this morning is India's renewable energy revolution towards a cleaner, cheaper electricity system. We have a very, very distinguished panel here. Their CVs are with you, so I will not introduce them, but to set the stage for the discussion that would follow, the word I'd like to highlight is the word revolution. And there has been a revolution because India's change in the matter of giving renewable energy the priority it deserves has been quite extraordinary. And I recall that in the beginning of this century, India took a position, and I also used to hold that view, that this is frightfully expensive and it's for the rich people to succeed in renewable energy, the rich countries of the world, and we will have a modest program. And when in 2009-10 we launched our national solar mission, The target was a modest 20,000 megawatts in 2020. And I used to be in government then, and it appeared impossible. So what we've seen in these last 8-10 years, the revolution, and our Secretary MNRE is Mr. Anand Kumar is there, and he will dwell on it and some more. But the revolution we've experienced has surprised us and probably the world. But given the threat of climate change and the imminent threat, and the fact that time is running out for mankind, I think what India does in this area matters as much to India and perhaps more so to the world because of our sheer size. Our population is about to overtake China's. Our per capita energy consumption has to grow manyfold. So what we do in the coming years is very important for mankind as a whole. And I believe we should be conscious of that. And the revolutionary success that we've had, I think, should give us confidence that we can do far more than we think we are capable of doing. And in this respect, we are very fortunate to have Lord Turner, who I've met a few times, and each time I meet him, I become a greater admirer because of the passion, the clarity, and his commitment to the cause of saving the planet. So with these words, may I request you to say a few words? I'd request our panelists to take about 8 to 10 minutes each, so that we have some time for a few questions, and we also have a very interesting book release at the end.
Good. I think I'll do it from there. Yeah. Ajay, thank you very much for that introduction. And I, first of all, wanted to say what a huge pleasure it's been here for these 3 days of the World Sustainable Development Summit, which is a really remarkable intellectual feast of issues to do with sustainable development and also most enjoyable. I'd also just like to say what a huge pleasure it has been now for 3 years to be co-chair of the Energy Transition Commission globally with Ajay Mathur. I mean, I first met Ajay 3 years ago, and we've worked together very closely on global issues, on Indian issues, and it's been an absolute delight to do that. The Energy Transition Commission is a global coalition of companies and NGOs. It's quite an eclectic and global coalition because it goes across many sectors of the economy. It has major fossil fuel companies like Shell and BP. It has companies here in India like Tata and Dalmia Cement, and we heard earlier on the video from Mahendra Singhi of Dalmia Cement. We have just had join us one of the biggest power generation companies in China, Huaneng Group. We have wind turbine manufacturers. We have venture capitalists in the IP space. We have major environmental NGOs like European Climate Foundation's Rocky Mountain Institute and World Resources Institute. But this whole coalition is committed to the challenge of how to build a zero carbon economy, a real zero carbon economy, fast enough across the world to meet the Paris climate agreements, while also delivering the very significant increases in energy supply, which will be needed, not in the developed countries where we can grow our prosperity further by energy efficiency, but here in India, we will need 2 or 3 times, 3 times probably as much energy per capita use, however more efficient India gets at energy efficiency. So we have to meet both those challenges. And it's been clear right from the beginning of our work that the most fundamental initial thing that you do is to decarbonize the electricity system and electrify as much of the economy as possible. And everybody knows that. But 18 months ago, we decided that we should work out what was the answer in all the sectors of the economy where that's not so easy, what are sometimes called the hard-to-abate sectors, like steel, cement, chemicals, aviation, shipping, where it's not so obvious that you can electrify them. And so for 18 months, we've done a global study of those sectors. And the good news is that we're convinced that even in those sectors, zero carbon is mission possible, as our report calls it. And one of the interesting things about even those sectors is that when you look at them, a lot of those require electricity. We think you can electrify trucking to a greater extent than people realize, but it's also electricity used in an indirect fashion. The route to decarbonizing steel may be through hydrogen made from electrolysis. The route to decarbonize shipping may be through ammonia built in shipping engines with the hydrogen which goes into the ammonia coming from electrolysis. And so we have a vision now of how to have a zero carbon economy in which there will be a massive increase in global electricity demand, either used directly or used to create hydrogen. We are talking about a world in which total electricity generation could go across the world now from 23,000 terawatt hours to something between 80 and 100,000 terawatt hours by 2060. With some of that going into producing hydrogen, and with hydrogen going from 60 million tons a year today to something like 500 or 600 million tons by the late 21st century. And all of that says is that what we've realized is that decarbonizing electricity is even more important than we thought. Indeed, decarbonizing electricity and electrifying the economy, I have to put it like this, it isn't all of the decarbonization story for the global economy, but it is sort of 70% of the story. There are other things we need to do, biofuels, maybe carbon capture and storage, but electricity, electrification, and decarbonizing electricity is the absolute core of the story. And it's great, therefore, that the good news is that something's happened in the last 10 years which has massively increased our confidence that we can decarbonize electricity at an affordable cost. The cost of solar has come down 90%, the cost of wind has come down 70%, the cost of batteries that can be used for overnight flexibility have come down for 85%. And we therefore ended up believing that there is an absolutely believable story now in which you can set out to build electricity systems which will eventually be near total variable renewable, up to 85% variable renewable, and that those will work, and that those will be able to deliver electricity at levels comparable with fossil fuel systems. And we can be very confident that that is the case because there are some countries already heading in that direction. I was recently in Germany talking to the major grid operator in the northeast of the country. They are dealing with a grid system now where 53% of all the electricity is coming from variable renewables. And they're managing it, and it's working, and the frequency control works, and the ramping works, and they're confident that they can go to 65% easily with hardly any difficulty, and eventually to 80 or 85%. Places like California, most of Scandinavia, will be 80 or 90 or 100% variable renewable by the mid-century, if not before. So it is doable, but the other thing we decided to do 18 months ago, 2 years ago now, is to work out whether it's doable in a very challenging environment, and that challenging environment is India. Because, as Ajay, our chairman, said earlier, there's some very challenging features of India. Its sheer size makes it hugely important to prove that we can have decarbonization here, as well as in Sweden, which, for all the importance of Sweden in the world, is 8 million people, not 1,400 million people and 1,700 million people, as it will be. There are challenges about the complexity of the inherited system here. There is big growth in electricity demand needed. So for the last 18 months, ETC India, led by Ajay, has been looking at, is it possible specifically in India, and how fast is it possible to build, first of all, a partially decarbonized and then eventually a wholly decarbonized electricity system. And at the end of this session, we will be launching, Ajay will be launching 3 reports which answer that question. And those 3 reports cover the issue of demand, how much demand is going to increase, and we think that by 2030, demand could increase from about 1,100 terawatt hours today to 2,400 terawatt hours, and going up thereafter. Supply, is there enough land to provide for a big increase in renewables and flexibility, which David Nelson is going to talk about. If we took very big increases in variable renewables here in India, would we be able to deal with the problems of flexibility and backup, overnight, seasonal balancing, etc.? And the conclusion is absolutely clear. And you may be sitting on top of the conclusion unless you picked it up. It is the press release which has been put on all the chairs, and it is that India can, by 2030, achieve 30% variable renewable generation at no extra cost. That's 30% variable renewables, wind and solar. That's in the grid as well. There's a little bit extra on rooftop solar. There's another 4% from small hydro and biomass, and there's then another 11% from large hydro and nuclear. And this vision, which is being set out in these three reports, would see India by 2030 having 45% of its electricity from zero carbon electricity generation. And I think it's important to realize and just get relativities right. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, that's not much more ambitious than the NDC under the Paris Commitment. It is massively more ambitious, because the NDC under the Paris Commitment is for 40% capacity to be zero carbon by 2030. This is 45% of generation. So we are absolutely confident that it's possible. The reports set it out. David will talk to the flexibility bit of it, but the other reports are very clear about it. And I think that gives us a confidence that even in a very challenging environment like India, we can begin down that path to a very significant decarbonization of electricity, a path which can take us 45% of the way by 2030, en route to eventually going the whole way. And I think, therefore, we should take out of this a very optimistic point of view that what we have to do is absolutely possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Turner. Or maybe I should call you Adair.
Adair.
Yes. It's my privilege to request Mr. Anand Kumar, the Secretary of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in India. I think he has one of the most exciting and satisfying jobs in government, not only in India, but across the world. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, distinguished panelists, friends, ladies and gentlemen, friends of media. It's been a privilege to be on this panel, and we all would agree that yes, energy transition is the biggest disruption happening in the century. And this would make a lot of difference to the countries, and I say the have-not countries, which do not have the fossil fuels and large population like ours. For India, moving on to renewables and fight against the climate change is a matter of faith, it's a matter of commitment. And that has been amply put forward by our Honorable Prime Minister during the Paris Accord, when he set the target of meeting 40% of our electricity capacity by 2030 from non-fossil fuels, and also reducing the carbon intensity of our economy by 33 to 35% compared to 2005 level by again 2030. And towards these goals, we have set a target of setting a capacity of 175 gigawatt, RE capacity of 175 gigawatt by 2022. And if I can see a demand of around 6%, 6.5%, we would need around 850 gigawatt by 2030. I'm happy to share with you that today we have achieved or installed RE capacity of around 76 gigawatt in the country. 23 gigawatt is under various stages of installation, and another 27 gigawatt is under various stages of bidding. So if you see the installed capacity and capacity under installation, we are at the figure of 125 gigawatt. So just 50 gigawatt more to go, and which we are confident that we would be able to bid by March 2020, and we would be able to install this capacity by the set target of 2022. To achieve the target of 500 gigawatt by 2030, we propose to bid out 30 gigawatt of solar and 10 gigawatt of wind every year. So the trajectory has already been announced. And by 2030, we would also be requiring around 1,200 gigawatt hour through storage. We are well aware of the problems of integration. We are developing green corridors. We are developing RE resource management centers. We are also taking new schemes which would be at the tail end of the grid. We are also aware of the importance of energy storage. And as the cost of storage would come down, which we expect to fall by 66% by 2030, or perhaps a little earlier than that, then the renewable would be a different story altogether. So we would be perhaps moving to a grid-free world. So you would have your own solar and wind mill, and you would have your own storage capacity and meeting your own demand. For storage, we are going to work by demand creation, and we are also trying to bring in the phased manufacturing program so that we do not miss the bus as we missed the bus on solar PVs. So we are alive of situation on the storage. When we talk about energy per se, globally we feel that yes, but the statistics of FERIDA says that by 2023, 30% of electricity would be generated through renewables, and 10% of the heat demand would be met through renewables, and around 4% or 5% in the transportation sector. Renewables, I said 175 gigawatt, installation, under installation 125, 50 more to go. Here we are not considering the large hydro. If we consider large hydro, and if I include large hydro, then today I have 76 gigawatt of renewable capacity through other sources, plus 45 gigawatt through large hydro capacity. So I have a total installed capacity of 35% of my total capacity through renewables per se, considering large hydro. Otherwise, I have got 22% of my total capacity through RE. But I would take the figure of 35% considering large hydro. But then when I include large hydro, I'm not compromising on the target of 175. So it would be 175 plus 45 for me. So we are on the target, as I said earlier. Second, I said that we are developing green corridors to take care of the integration. Now, what is plaguing the RE sector? Availability of land and transmission. And for this, we want to have a common vision with the state governments. We are requesting the state governments to identify pool of land where we can set up ultra mega parks of 10 to 15 to 20 gigawatts, or perhaps a little more. Establish the transmission needs and work against a timeline for evacuating the power from there. And these we are going to call the RE parks. So state government identify lands, they fix the lease rent or the rent at which the land can be made available to the entrepreneurs. We erect the transmission system by taking some money from the developer, by putting some money from our own kitty, and taking some money from the state government. So transmission is in time, the land is in time, evacuation is time, and we do, and what we offer is to do business to the developers, and we also we build confidence among the financial institutions. Yes, land is available, transmission is available, there will not be any problem, and let's invest in RE sector. So this is what we are planning to do, and towards this end, we have already announced our first RE park in Leh. And we plan to evacuate in the first stage 10 gigawatt of RE power, the solar power basically, from Leh, then to Una or Hisar or through transmission. And the bid is already out in this direction, and this bid will be so close, because we don't want also to put more burden on the central government for transmission. So what we want to do is we want to move forward in RE sector with the help of the private investment. Till today, most of our capacity of 75 gigawatt has come through private investment. And now we are moving forward to bring in investment in the transmission sector also. So the full thing would be, our renewable energy program would be riding on the private sector investment, on the policies which we would like to make to encourage the investment in the sector by giving a fair return, and also by providing ease to do business here. This is the electricity scenario. But when we talk about the electricity scenario, this is regarding the grid connected. But then we have got the off-grid connected also. When we talk about off-grid connected, if you see the statistics, around 6.6 gigawatt of capacity is there in the world, which serves around 146 million people. We have remote areas where the grid cannot go. And at the global level, there are very many people who today around who live without the reach of grid or without electricity. So we have to focus on the off-grid solution also. And when we provide an off-grid solution, it is not only the electricity. We also try to do the heat management. We also try to do the management of other demands of energy, may it be drying, may it be cooling, may it be cooking. We are providing 800 units of solar drying in Leh for drying apricots and apples. The farmer, if he used to dry apple and apricots in open, the fungal infection used to take place. Drying used to take far more hours, and then he was not getting a good price. But since inception of our solar drying units, he gets hygienic product and he gets better return. Similarly, we are trying to go on the cooking, and in fact, I am very happy to inform you that we have introduced solar cooking in 2 villages. This is based on induction. One in MP, it's in Mittal, and second in Andaman and Nicobar Island. So there are around 200 families which are cooking through solar induction. And we would like to take it forward. And we would like to reduce the drudgery of the women. We are concerned about health of women. And we would like to reduce the dependence on the firewood. Our Honorable Prime Minister had already announced setting up of International Solar Alliance on the sides of COP21. And we all are witness that within a short span of time, this initiative has come into being. Today we have around 71 signatories to the treaty. International Solar Alliance, we held the founding conference on March the 11th, and the first assembly was held from 3rd of October to 5th of October. We want to take this initiative to all countries around the globe. Initially, the membership of this initiative was restricted between the two tropics. But then India moved a resolution and stated that yes, this initiative should not only be restricted between the two tropics, but it should, the benefit of this initiative should go globally. And I'm happy to inform you that during the first assembly, this agenda or this amendment moved by India was accepted. So our commitment to provide or become instrumental in moving towards renewable energy globally and help our friends, our friend countries and other associates around the globe remains there, and we remain committed not only to our people, but the people globally per se. RE, we, believe it or not, but we're led by solar. Just 2 more minutes, sir. It would be led by solar. So, and then followed by wind and hydro has got its problem. Last year, in 2017, around 167 gigawatt of RE capacity was added. But then 32% was a growth in the solar capacity addition, led by and followed by wind. So when we see that yes, the solar is going to lead the RE revolution, we have to strengthen the International Solar Alliance. And International Solar Alliance, therefore, would be a great contributor towards the RE revolution, towards the energy transition, ladies and gentlemen. Friends, lastly, we are not only talking about the grid connection, we are not only talking about the off-grid connections for providing electricity to the household, the residential units. We are equally concerned about the farm sector. And towards de-dieselization of the farm sector, we are bringing out a new scheme called Kusum. And what this scheme envisages, it envisages setting up of 500 kilowatt to 200 megawatt tail end solar projects. If any farmer's land is lying barren, so he can put solar projects on their land and supply power to grid and earn income by doing the solar farming. And what we have calculated is a farmer can have an income of around 100,000 rupees per acre per year if he does solar farming on his land. Besides, we are also planning to supply around 2.75 million pumps for the farm sector, out of which 1.75 million pumps would be off-grid and rest would be grid connected. So farmer would be able to have his captive power. Farmer would be able to supply additional power to the grid, have an additional income, and when he will be having an additional income, then he would be he would try to conserve water, and when he tries to conserve water, this would obviously get to add on to onto water conservation. And if a farmer has got a captive power, the DISCOMs will not be mandated to give the subsidy which we give largely to the farm sector. So we'll be saving on the subsidy which is provided by the DISCOMs, and in turn you and me would be able to get supply of electricity at a lower rate, because we cross-subsidize the farm sector today. So friends, ladies and gentlemen, so these are the few initiatives we are doing. So our commitment remains to move towards renewable energy, towards fight against change in environment, to fighting environmental change, and also support globally the other nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I now request Mr. Vineet Mittal, Chairman of the Vanda Group. But before you speak, one sentence I will take. When I said we had a revolution, one aspect of the revolution which we don't highlight sufficiently, though the Secretary mentioned it, is this has been achieved primarily by the private sector of India, primarily through private enterprise and a very, very competitive industry structure. So this is one of the great success stories of private entrepreneurship in India, and he's a good representative.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. As our brand ambassador of our industry and secretary of our department of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, he shared the vision which country has and lot of amazing thing which is happening in India, which in my view is derived from the personal passion of our Prime Minister. And we were lucky and fortunate. I moved industry, so I was an IT entrepreneur in the BPO industry, and way back in 2009, Gujarat actually inspired us by their positive policy to become an entrepreneur in the clean and sustainable energy. And we were lucky and fortunate to set up first few of the large solar power plants in India from Gujarat, Maharashtra, MP. Almost in 8 different states, we were the first one to set up the first solar large grid connected project. And probably among few of the success story which this industry has created. When initially I used to talk in forum like this, many of the people used to ask me the question, is it because of the passion you are in this business, or is it going to give any return also? And I've always said that it's about making good money by doing good karma. And in the sense that each of us should have a purpose which is higher than just serving its own family. And the purpose should be driven by serving the communities and serving the society. And if you are doing it with the good intention, profit will follow. And it actually doesn't, it's not a contradiction to be in good business and make good profit. And I think one of the biggest challenge which is happening now, that Indian government has huge ambitious plan to become sustainable. And I think our challenge as a country is that we ignore many aspects when we look at about sustainable living. We are probably the only country where 2.5 million people die every year because of the environment-related issue which is identified by WHO and many other research organizations. Though 9 million people die across the world, but India being 1/6 of the population, probably our percentage should have been 1/6, but we are close to 1/4. So the highest number of people die in our country because of environment-related reason, and almost 9 million kids are dying before they are born because of pollution. Even in my personal case, I had moved to Delhi from Bombay, and when we had kids, we relocated back to Bombay, and we were advised by doctors to everyone that it won't be so healthy bringing up your kids in Delhi. So if we live in such a country where top 10 most polluted cities are there, should we be even looking at the world to set up our own standards? I think it's the most important need for our country to be responsible for our citizen and to be responsible for our next generation. And the policy makers and the country should look at from the angle that they have no rights to deprive the next generation of natural resources and the climatic condition which we have inherited from our forefather. And we are the country where we actually worship trees. Most of the people worship Vatvrich, and it's in our Vedas, it's considered that one Vatvrich is equivalent to 10 kids. And if you decide to remain celibate and not have kids, then it's always important to plant one wat vrich and people trees and have tulsi tree, because tulsi and wat vrich even gives oxygen in the night. So living in the country where our forefathers worshipped every natural source, we considered earth as mother and trees, sun, water as God. And in that country, we are still continue to pollute. And one of the greatest example is that now in clean energy sector, we have all forms of taxes. We have safeguard duty, we have GST. We are probably among very few industry which work on reverse auction, and the government's full focus is only on the cost, whereas they subsidized thermal power generation. And I'll give an example which probably I would encourage TERI to actually do a research and publish a white paper on, is that we are the country which actually supplies coal through Coal India on cost plus model. And we supply coal at 1100 to 1200 rupees per ton to thermal power industry. And when other industry buy the same coal, they have to buy through e-auction, and the last week's average was 2500 rupees. So if you look at a 1000 megawatt power plant, and I'm talking about supercritical, then you are talking about 5 million ton of coal consumption. So that means government is subsidizing 700 crore. So if you look at 1400 rupees difference in per ton of coal into 5 million. So 700 crore of subsidy is going into each and every thermal power plant which we are operating. And if you have 2,20,000 megawatt of thermal power plant, and even if it's operating at 70% PLF or 65% PLF, we are talking about lakhs of crore which government is subsidizing every year. And if you look at any budget or any government scheme, what are we talking for the clean and sustainable energy is probably minuscule, few hundred crore or maybe 1,000 crore. And I think that's where there is a huge policy disconnect. We talk a lot about encouraging solar and wind and hydro sector, but we subsidize indirectly thermal power plants because we say that consumer cannot pay for the expensive electricity. So let there be a level playing field, that whoever is the most competitive source of energy on the same platform with the similar tax structure be a winner. Are we actually putting 25% safeguard duty on thermal power plant? No. Second question to ask is that in India we have 80,000 megawatt of captive power plant. So people, small industries like say cement, aluminum, copper, steel, paper or textile, most of them set up their own captive power plant of 25 megawatt, 30 megawatt, 50 megawatt. And we did some study in-house, and we found that most of them are importing coal. And we are a country where our current account deficit is negative because of import of oil and gas and coal. So why we don't bring out a policy where there is a sunset clause given to all these captive power plant, saying that by 2022 we will not have any coal-based captive power plant. And reason I am targeting captive power plant, because they use small machines which are actually very polluting. So if you look at supercritical or ultra supercritical power plants have 1800 station heat rate compared to 3500 station heat rate. So probably they consume twice as much of coal compared to a large supercritical efficient thermal power plant. So if those 80,000 megawatt of captive is turned to solar with battery backup, then what are you talking? You are talking about a huge disruption and change. You don't have any transmission line challenge because those 80,000 megawatt are already connected to the grid. They have the transmission line access already available to them. And it will be a game changer because it won't, those polluting plants will no more be part of India's econet. And plus, I think to become more bolder, I would encourage government and TERI to bring out a paper and show the exact carbon emitted by every plant which is not supercritical, and come out with a phase policy of discontinuing these expensive and extremely polluting thermal power plant. Like say for example, so the last one I'll say example of Delhi. Delhi, everyone complains and craves about pollution, and in the city of Delhi, we have thermal power plant getting operated by NTPC. So is that not a challenge that we talk so much about sustainability, COPs 21, whereas in the most affected parts of the country, we still have polluting plants operating successfully. Thank you, everyone.
May I now request Mr. David Nilsson to bring in the most critical perspective, that is of finance.
Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank TERI for inviting us and hosting this event, and also being a partner with us in the Energy Transitions Commission of Europe. And as well, we've been involved in the Energy Transitions, in India. We've been involved in the Energy Transitions Commission globally for the last 3 years as well, and TERI has been involved in that. So again, my thanks, and thanks as well to NREL, who are also part of that, that coalition working here. We have heard from the speakers about the ambitions and the low cost of renewable energy, particularly in comparison to where the coal plants are developing. And what always comes when you hear that is, that's fine, but an electricity system, you need to balance the supply and demand of electricity in every second. And we know that wind comes when it comes and not when you are planning to use electricity. So how do you make that balance? That surely must impose a cost. So one of the first things that we have done within this work is to say, well, exactly how much is that cost? And in fact, what is the total cost of a system when you incorporate all the costs that are required to make it flexible enough to absorb renewable energy? We looked at a whole range of renewable energy, from the current progress to much more higher targets that go well beyond what the current policy sets out. The interesting thing we found is that in all cases, flexibility, enhancing the flexibility of the electricity system, significantly reduces the cost of electricity. No matter how much renewable energy you put in, you need to improve the flexibility to lower your costs. But interestingly then, what we found is that once you've enhanced the flexibility, the cost of integrating more and more renewables, going beyond the current targets, is almost zero. Once you have the flexibility, it's quite easy to integrate these, the further renewables. And in fact, we found that going well beyond the government's targets with enhanced flexibility would provide electricity more cheaply than going at the current slower pace with the existing levels of flexibility. So key messages: you need to do it anyway, and once you do it, the renewable energy comes in, integrates fairly inexpensively. So the first thing is, though, what is this when we're talking about flexibility? What does this mean? It's a number of things. First of all, you need to be flexible enough such that if you have a sudden outage of a power plant, or if a transmission line goes down, you can bring electricity supply back on almost instantaneously to maintain that balance. That's called reserves. You need to be able to match demand minute by minute as everyone comes home and turns on their air conditioners at the same time the sun sets, and you have what's called a ramping rate. You have to ramp up all your electricity supply very quickly to meet that change in demand. You need to be able to balance, if you have excess production in the middle of the day from a lot of solar production, with your demand for air conditioning that might happen at 11 o'clock at night. You need to make that balance. And again, you need to balance for, that's called daily balancing. And you need to balance the fact that you'll have more wind during the monsoon season than in other times of the year. So that's called seasonal balancing. You need to make each one of those things work. The good news, well, before one more step, if you look across all those four general types of flexibility, we see that while energy demand and capacity demand, peak demand in India by 2030 will double to 2.5 times where it is now. These flexibility needs can go up by as much as 6-fold. That is, in many cases, the flexibility needs will go up 3 times as fast as the needs for more energy. The good news, though, is that there are 3 somewhat established to varying degrees, ways of achieving this flexibility and increasing the flexibility in India. The first of which is the thermal power plants, which currently provide a lot of the flexibility, but they could provide a lot more. There are institutional barriers. The flexibility comes from you have a maximum rated output, and then you have a minimum output below which the power plant won't be stable. That difference between that minimum and the maximum rated is the flexibility. The plants in India generally are designed to run at 55%. In a number of places, they are restricted by institutional issues to run a minimum of 70%. Just moving from 70% to 55%, you can see increases your flexibility of that plant from 30 to 45%. But in the ETC, we have also been working with people like Siemens to show how with investment, you can easily move a number of the power plants down to 40% minimum or even 30% minimum, and also begin to move power plants so that you'll be able to cycle them, to shift them on and off over the course of a week or seasons. All of those greatly increase the flexibility. Now, there is a cost. There is a cost because efficiency when you're running at minimum is lower, and you also might have costs for startups and shutdowns, and there might be costs for some additional operating costs, although we think those are lower from experience in other countries. Those are lower than perhaps suggested by some of the engineers in India. But you need to have incentives that drive that behavior, and you need to have the awareness that creates value for the system. And I think we're beginning to get there a bit. The second place, the cheapest source of flexibility in India, is around beginning to get demand to respond to the time that electricity is produced. This can work through slightly shifting the time of when you start your air conditioning to reduce that ramp, right? You have electric vehicle charging. You have agricultural pumping where you can shift time to the time that you're pumping the water to create a lot of value. There's a lot of industrial demand shifting opportunities, all of which currently we don't do because there's been no value ascribed to it. And so no one realizes that there's this untapped value. We find that just between those first 2, you could achieve everything that India needs. In fact, there's a big discussion about batteries being a panacea. Well, batteries in many ways are really the fallback. If those first 2 don't work, batteries can then replace it at a slightly higher cost than demand. Of course, the batteries also have the advantage that they solve a lot of other issues in the electricity system, like reducing distribution costs if you place the batteries in the place. And they create a lot of, the other point is you need to have locational flexibility that is served either through deciding where you're going to run your power plants or where you're going to build transmission lines, but also that can be resolved by batteries. And so once you've incorporated those values in batteries, there is a much bigger role, but be assured that even if we don't develop batteries and they don't fall to the cost that we've set out, that you can still make this work if you get the demand side and the power plants right. But altogether, what we found is the best solution really is a portfolio of all of these measures working together to create the absolute lowest costs. And in fact, what we think the plan is that since we are certain that the thermal power plant can provide flexibility, we need to start developing those incentives as soon as possible. At the same time, we need to put all our efforts into creating the systems that will enable the demand flexibility to come in and take a prevalent role in the India system. And at the same time, we need to continue the programs that we were talking about with MNRE, with incentivizing the build out and development of batteries, lowering the costs, and making them a major part of the industry here. And so finally, that's a pretty optimistic picture, but what are the things that we need to do more practically. The first thing that we find is we need more data. If you're going to have a demand side program work or a power plant program work, you need to understand how people are currently using electricity so that you know how to shift it. You need to know where the additional opportunity is in the power plants, and you know where the value will come out from taking those activities. The second thing is, as we said, we need to continue technology development, not just in batteries, but there are some additional information technology and control systems that are needed to integrate all this together. We need to be very, very thoughtful in terms of how we plan and develop our infrastructure. Our transmission no longer needs to just be focused on getting electricity from point A to point B, but also can we use it to unlock flexibility. A state like UP has, by our analysis, lots and lots of excess flexibility they can offer the grid. Places like Karnataka or Tamil Nadu are short. If we do not have the transmission capacity and the trading systems behind it so that we can export that flexibility, UP will lose out because there's value that they could create and use to lower electricity rates. And Karnataka and Tamil Nadu will lose out because they're going to have to use more expensive flexibility in their home markets. So every time we're thinking about infrastructure, we need to think about the delivery of the flexibility services as well. We need to build awareness amongst consumers and amongst the power plant operators of the value that they are providing. We need to provide incentives, as we said before, so that the power plants and the consumers know and benefit from the flexibility they have. And if I am a consumer, I will need to install metering equipment or control systems and have the inconvenience of turning on my air conditioning maybe half an hour earlier. So we need to be able to compensate it from that system. We need to have business models where people can aggregate the demand and the batteries and the power plants together and learn how to optimize it to create value and investment. And finally, we need a way to pull all of these things together through markets that enable us to trade off the power, the power plants, the batteries, the demand side, and to achieve the lowest costs that we have. And once we have that together, I'm confident that not only can we reach India's renewable targets, not only can we reach the high renewable energy scenario that TERI has put out, but beyond 2030, we can go well beyond the 45% that Adair was talking about and achieve the levels of 85% variable renewable energy in the system and still have a reliable system. Thanks.
Thank you. Your concluding comment is really encouraging. In fact, 2-3 thoughts which I felt I should emphasize before we wind up this wonderful panel discussion. One is good news that the thermal power stations give us enough flexibility. This is a message that needs to go out. The other is, in terms of storage, I heard battery storage, but there is the other technical option of thermal storage using molten salt.
Right.
I think it's time we went out and had a few pilot projects of 30-40 megawatts, so that we create the same learning and the private sector capacity in that area. So if we want to ramp up, we can ramp up rapidly. And the final message I get, and which is very critical, is that the time we persuaded our regulators to move more aggressively on tariffs which are sharply different between peak hours and off-peak hours, so that the supply side response of putting in sensors and timers into air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines starts kicking in. Sure. I think it's time we moved in that direction. With these brief comments, we now come to the most important part of the session, which is release of the reports of the Energy Transition Commission. And I'll request Dr. Ajay Mathur to come onto the stage and say a few words about these fascinating studies, exciting studies, and needed a lot of interdisciplinary work. If Mr. Baba is there from POSOCO, may I request him to also come onto the stage?
Thank you, sir. We have the great pleasure to release 3, or actually 4, sets of publications. As Lord Turner mentioned, these reflect analyses, sectoral analyses, state-based analyses on how the growth is going to occur as far as demand is concerned. Where is it coming from? At what time is it coming? Load profiles play an important part, and I want to thank Mr. Baba for the contribution, his personal contribution and POSOCO's contribution to making that happen. The second is relating to supply. What are the options that are there, and how can the renewable energy solutions become the preferred solutions? And you heard David talk about them. So that's in supply and flexibility. We also have the pleasure to release today a book, Green, Reliable and Viable, India's Shift Towards Low Carbon Energy. This book is a collection of the perspectives from a range of stakeholders, each one of them an expert in his or her own area, and they focus on what are the kinds of supply options, what do you do next. As far as the market or financing is concerned, what are the kinds of challenges, what do you do next? As far as the demand side is concerned, how do you move towards lower carbon? Each one of them is a short essay, 1,200 words or so, and written so that it is very easy to communicate what these experts believe are the ways ahead. We have been extremely fortunate and we are delighted that we are publishing this as part of an overall global publishing agreement that TERI has now with Taylor and Francis. The South Asian edition will be made available now in the TERI Press booth, which is in the exhibition area, and will be available internationally through Taylor and Francis. I request Ms. Natisha Devasar, Managing Director, Taylor and Francis, and my colleague Anupama Jowri, the head of the TERI Press, to come onto the stage and join us for the book release. I also request all the authors of the book to join us. I know Anirban is here somewhere. Amit Kumar, Thomas, Mr. Rashmi, Noemi, and if I have missed anybody out who is here who is an author, please do join us here. And I request the chairman and the panel to release these reports and book. Yes, large. Yes.
It's okay, we can reach. Yeah. So maybe can't be less number of people. Yeah, we can just put the hand like the two or three of us could put together something. Why don't we make this we can go to the back. Yeah, I think all the people can go to the back. Thank you very much. Yes, nice. You also gave us